Hi, welcome to episode 5 of our Keep and Bear LLC video podcast. I'm Don Alley.
And I'm Bear Javessian.
And today we are going to talk about basically gun violence. As of right now, when this is being recorded, there's all kinds of issues going on. The Florida shooting just happened, and a bunch of teenagers are being paraded in front of the media who is over-sensationalizing everything, and essentially there's a big clamor for giving up our gun rights in the name of safety, which we all know how well that works.
We just hope to break down some numbers here and try and educate, or at least illuminate, some of the facts behind the arguments on the gun side, and look at what is being presented by the media and the arguments on the anti-gun side. We're going to try and address some of those. It sounds like a big topic. We're just going to break it down a little bit, but we wanted to do this to be an educational podcast, basically.
Yep. And, a lot of this is going back to, there's a lot of agenda-driven things going on. Whenever you hear someone using the term gun violence, that precludes, or that basically loads the whole answer. The solution obviously is about guns, if all we're talking about is gun violence. I know as someone that teaches people how to protect themselves, as do you, we want to stop all violence because we don't want good, peaceable people being harmed.
No.
And the idea here is if you limit the talk to just gun violence, there's a lot of statistics that come up. There's a lot of other numbers that get bandied about, and a lot of it can be fairly deceitful. So we wanted to, not necessarily parade a bunch of numbers in front of you, but really talk more about the principles behind some of these numbers.
Mm-hmm. I think one of my personal sticking points, one thing that aggravates me when I hear, is the comparison of our nation, the United States of America, to other industrialized nations in terms of, they'll talk in terms of gun violence. They'll say, well, look, no other industrial nation has gun violence like the United States does. But they conveniently leave out violence as a whole. As Don said, they load the topic. It's gun violence. Should we not be concerned about violence as a whole? They'll talk about suicide in the United States and the high suicide rates, and how how a lot of people who commit suicide use firearms. Well, that is unique to the United States, is how many people use firearms for suicide, but what's the overall suicide rate for the United States compared to the rest of the industrial world? I don't even think we cracked the top 10, maybe the top 20, but we're significantly lower than much of the world. So that never gets talked about. They conveniently omit facts. They conveniently just ignore things that don't fit their narrative.
Yeah, so the thing is, if someone commits suicide with a firearm, it goes into that statistic. Mm-hmm. And then that statistic becomes a justification for, we need to come take your guns. Mm-hmm. And if someone is intent and willing to do themselves harm, what law can be passed to stop that? Mm-hmm. It is the height of megalomania to think that some guy in a Capitol building of some type somewhere can scribble something down on a piece of paper and get a bunch of his friends to agree to it and sign it as well, mm-hmm. that's going to stop someone who is intent on harming themselves. You can't do it. So whether they use a firearm or a sword or a knife or carbon monoxide or drugs or whatever else they use, that number should not be included in the gun violence statistic because there is no stopping it. To the counterpoint that slightly is the gun may make it slightly easier for someone to make that decision. If you have to fall on a knife or if you have to do something in another way, the gun may make it slightly easier, but I can't really see that when you can just go to the store and get a bunch of sleeping pills, and go out very, very quietly, So maybe there's a small asterisk you can put on that, but just to be fair, to be able to say something and mention it, to be objective, but in the grand scheme of things, you can't make a law that can stop someone from killing themselves. And therefore, you should not be basing your laws to protect society around someone willing to do himself harm.
And I think the suicide aspect really punches holes in the anti-gunner agenda, because if we really want to make a dent in the number of people who die every year related to firearms, this would be the number one cause, number one issue to attack. And it's something everyone can unite around in terms of better mental health, better community involvement, better peer involvement, better medical care, all these things that can help mitigate and relieve this epidemic of suicide. And that's not a political discussion at all. That's not anti-gun, that's not pro-gun, that's something everyone can rally around. And you don't see that. Again, you see them just use those numbers. And by the way, we were talking about the numbers earlier. There's approximately 30 to 33,000 deaths a year that are associated with firearms, and of those, about 2/3, almost 20,000, are suicides. So if we want to be honest about this discussion, if we want to see some change, we want to see some positive movement, this would be a great place to start. And I don't know anybody who owns a gun who wouldn't be willing to have the discussion on how to help people make decisions that are going to lead them away from suicide. So this is not something, again, like Don said, this is not something that can be legislated away. This is something that's going to take involvement. And I think if the people who are currently advocating for tighter gun control and restricting freedoms were honest, and if they really want to make a difference, this is something they should talk about, and I think everyone would get on board. But we don't see that.
Yeah. And ultimately it boils down to be involved in the people's lives who you care about. And
absolutely. Absolutely.
Let people know that you're there for them.
Mm-hmm.
Let them know that you are supportive of them.
Mm-hmm. There is a lot of resources out there for people, and we're not going to talk at length about that because we're not psychologists. My wife is a psychologist, and she always tells me, "You're not a psychologist, Barrage. You don't know what you're talking about." But there are a lot of resources out there for people. There are a lot of helplines in the community, phone lines. There are online help. There's community resources. Just talk to somebody. So if anyone watching this knows anybody that's in trouble or is in trouble themselves, know that there are resources for you.
Yep.
So,
or just talk to your friends.
Absolutely.
One of the things that I'm not a psychologist either, but one of the things that I've been thinking is, we have these kids willing to act out and commit violence and stuff like that, and it goes right along with suicide. We're seeing bullying as being the big cause of a lot of this, and bullying taken to its grimmest conclusions is either going to be someone lashing out and harming those who have continuously been harming him, or them just willing to take their own life. And one it just came out in the news today that one of the people who is in this Florida, in this student body that's protesting all these, for gun control, she admitted that she was bullying this kid. And, she said, okay, yeah, maybe I could have done better. I'm like, well, maybe it's kind of your fault, And, no, she didn't pull the trigger, but she's also not looking at anyone who did. She's not looking at the guy and saying it's his fault. She's looking at every other gun owner out there and saying it's all our faults. Wow. So that doesn't work there, but she identified herself as part of the problem. And, my idea that I'm kind of playing with right now in my head is the idea that we have no solace, or these kids have no solace. It used to be when we went to school, we would go there, and I was scrawny. I'd get bullied, and when I came home, I had a place of solace, a place where I could think about it, recoup, and get
Absolutely.
things back together. But now with Snapchat and Twitter and to a lesser extent Facebook, because kids don't use Facebook, their parents do. But with the
MySpace,
social
don't
media,
forget about MySpace.
don't forget MySpace. Yep. With all the social media, there is no respite.
Yeah,
So this kid gets bullied all day at school,
and it follows them home.
and then it follows him home. He's just simply bullied in an ongoing way,
Yeah.
just through a different medium when he gets home. And I think we need to find a way to better come to grips with the fact that we have a lot more, these kids growing up have a lot more access to each other than we did when we were growing up.
Yeah.
And that access can be good, but it can also be very, very bad, as we're finding. And I think part of the idea of addressing this issue is addressing the modern level of interconnectedness that people have now compared to what we had when we were younger.
That is a good point. That's not anything we had to deal with as children, and it is definitely a big factor in their lives now. I think a lot of it as well a lot of people would benefit from just being more empathetic, more, it sounds cliched, but kind and compassionate. And if these kids had role models to that extent, if their parents treated them in that fashion, and I'm not saying they don't, but there are still cases we hear with abuse and so forth. And I know single parent households and all this, these kids have to deal with growing up without these good role models,
Yep.
and that certainly doesn't help it. But adults can be that role model for children in that regard. They can act empathetic and caring towards people, and I think that would be part of a solution. But obviously, we're dealing with something that's very large here, and we don't have the time nor the credentials to properly address all of it. But to say, as far as the suicide and the bullying goes, with regards to how our topic of dealing with guns and gun violence, these kids were just a wee bit more, were shown a bit more compassion and more understanding. Perhaps we could see a bit of a reduction in that in these sort of things. But
Yeah. We also we need to look at the difference between support and shelter.
yeah, this is true.
And when we were growing up, we had supportive parents, and now we have a system of sheltering. The example I like to look at is, I think it's the EMU campus. During the elections, someone wrote Trump in a few places
I remember this.
with chalk. And the school set up grief and trauma counseling because these kids were so shocked
Oh boy.
that a differing viewpoint existed. It is what it boiled down to. There was trauma, personal trauma, emotional trauma about a different viewpoint existing. Now, support means that you help someone, but you expose them to things. I almost liken it to, like, when a kid is growing up and he gets like chicken pox, right? I don't want to say you purposely expose your kid to chicken pox so
The
he'll
chicken
never
pox
get
parties.
chicken
I remember
pox
those,
again,
yeah.
right? But when you get chicken pox, you don't get chicken pox again. You support someone through an issue, and it creates an immunity around that, or it creates a resiliency around that, okay? But if you hide a kid away in a basement for fear of all these microbes that are in the air, their immune system is never going to develop to the point to where they can fend off these illnesses. I think there's a psychological equivalent there where you can support someone through the learning and growing process to where they develop a mental resiliency to deal with differing viewpoints. But instead, somewhere along the way, we have substituted in sheltering them from that, to where these viewpoints are never even they're never exposed. And
then-
when they're not exposed, there's trauma around the first time they are exposed
And
to
then
it.
you see these kids go off to school, and they ideally, well, a whole point of university, the point of going off to college is to be exposed to new ideas, to learn new things, and when they're confronted with things that they are ill-equipped psychologically to deal with in terms of just a different opinion, their reaction is so visceral and violent, and the art of discussion, the art of a civil argument is lost on them. They don't seem to grasp that, and we see that especially, I think, in the anti-gun crowd and the anti-gun agenda. They wish to undercut the opposition, shout them down.
Yep.
They use emotion over facts, and this doesn't help anybody. It doesn't help advance the agenda, which the overall agenda, which should be reduction of violence, but their agenda is the reduction of guns in general. They want to take and reduce the rights of the public in America to own firearms, and I think that's
They've been told that to reduce gun violence, you reduce guns. And
well.
they've
and
got
again,
no reason to not believe it because this is what they've been told. And again, it comes back to they have been sheltered from reality
from opposing viewpoints.
and from opposing viewpoints and not supported in the growth process through this. So,
Well, it's just like what we talked about, the 30,000 number, and how we're breaking it down, and it's thrown out there constantly by the anti-gun crowd. Nobody bothers to break down that number and explain that about 2/3 of that number are suicide.
Yep.
And granted, every death is a tragedy, and we don't deny that at all. But they gets lumped into gun violence, as Don was saying, and that already loads the conversation. So it's already pointing in the direction. Well, if it's gun violence, it's got to be. We have to do something at guns.
Yep.
And to break down that number further, we were talking earlier about 5,000 of those gun deaths are accidents. Another very easily addressed segment of death by firearms that really everyone could unite behind. It's just a matter of better education, better understanding of firearms in general, and we could make a significant dent in that. But
Yep.
they don't talk about that. It's just prohibition. It's just restriction, and they continually moving the goalposts on
Yep.
what they want, and they want more and more. And I don't think it doesn't do them any favors. It certainly doesn't do the American public any favors.
correct. Yep. The other thing with accidents is it's completely, and all of this really, it boils down to education, which we'll be talking about kind of in our conclusion. But accidents are either, the gun community, the pro-firearm community, which if you break down the pro-gun community, there is the common pro-gun guy that's got a few guns and he goes out shooting with his friends every now and then you've got the more professional crowd who is this is their hobby, this is their thing. And when you start talking with these people that are much more in the know, they don't use the term accidents at all, they use the term negligence. Because
Exactly.
an accident is out of your control, and negligence is usually a result of something that was in your control.
The gun just went off.
Yeah.
Guns don't just go off.
Guns don't just go off. So they'll use the term negligence, and the two terms are distinct. They do have slightly different connotations, and it's important to make that connotation difference. When you're talking about negligence with a firearm, when you're breaking it down and cleaning it, there is unintentional discharges that happen at that point. Anytime you're handling a firearm, there is the propensity that it will go off due to your interaction with it. This doesn't mean I'm holding it and it just accidentally went off because I vibrated the gun in some way or mishandled it. This is, I handled it in a way that was inappropriate and actuated the trigger.
And this is why you need to learn and understand, get educated on safe gun handling.
Yep.
And I think, especially anti-gunners do themselves a disservice not learning that.
Correct.
Thing that they vilify, because it really would probably change a lot of their minds.
Yep,
certainly.
it would.
But,
And to get back to your 30,000 number, this is a way that the pro-gun community, those that believe in our individual rights, can actively go in and make a huge difference in the amount of firearm-related deaths per year. Okay, because the anti-gunners like to use gun violence. The pro-gunners understand this for what it is, a firearm-related death or injury. And that's very different when you start looking at just the again, it's all language.
Breaking
It's all
down the nuances
connotation
and
of
looking
those.
at the variables. Yeah.
Yep. If we become a more caring society, which is a tall order, but it's something that each individual can do. You know, there's some guy in office somewhere making, you know, laws on pieces of paper, and you can take an active interest in someone's life and support them, and that is independent of any law.
That's right.
And it'll be far more effective than any law. That's something you, the pro-gunner or even anti-gunner, can do now to help someone. If you really want to put your money where your mouth is and reduce harm or reduce deaths, that's something that you can do now. And it's on you if you do or don't.
Absolutely.
Okay? And accidents is something that the pro-gun community is actually pretty good at policing themselves with. We put on our Facebook page occasionally someone that did something inappropriate with their firearm. Like the lady that had the CPL that decided she was going to stop shoplifters at Home Depot or wherever it was. The pro-gun community, I don't want to say attacked her, but they went out and said, you behaved incorrectly, you are not acting in our name.
It's not an attack. It's calling out inappropriate behavior, and it's something, again, because they're educated and say, well, this is right, this is wrong.
Yep.
And I think you brought up a great point there, Don, about how individuals can act in someone else's life as opposed to legislation being done. And that brings up, again, not to go off too much on a political tangent here, but it does bring up a dichotomy, I think, that are to the progressive side versus the more conservative side. The progressive side tends to look at the government is the arbiter of these things, and by their decree, things happen.
Yep.
Whereas the conservative side looks at it's the individual that really is the driving force behind all these things, and it's incumbent on the individual to go out and not necessarily affect society, but the individual should better himself and in turn better those around him. So
that goes all the way back to, are your rights collective or are they individual? And that is a huge topic. And in the grand scheme of things, if you believe in the country's founding documents that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, well, the Bill of Rights then goes on to say what some of these rights are. And it doesn't say you are granted this, you are granted this, you are granted this. It says the government shall not create a law infringing this. It shall make no law limiting speech, you know, and you're not allowed to go in people's houses and root through their stuff, you know. The whole Bill of Rights, as we've said before, and everyone should know, is a limitation placed on government. And that very notion is indicative that the rights that people have are individual rights, okay? And if our rights are individual, and they are granted to me as a sentient being, and you as another sentient being, and everyone else as a sentient being, then there is no authority by which government can take them away, because our rights were not granted by government, okay?
our founding fathers in their documents, and their very good documents, said governments are formed to instill to ensure these rights for men,
Yes.
not for any other purpose. So
Right.
that's
So the counter to that is our rights a collective agreement. Okay? And this is where progressive liberalism really believes. They believe that the rights given to the people are all decided by us. And that we can just move that goalpost around whenever we want.
It's going to be in shifting sand because it will depend on whoever is in power, and that's why they look to government so much and put so much behind trying to get people elected, because that's where the power is going to be.
Correct.
And the mistake is us giving up the power for that.
Yep.
It should all be at the individual level. It should be the government has its scope, and it should be and the Constitution is very specific. It's a narrow scope. So
Correct. So any gun right argument has to start there. Is, okay, we're talking about what rights should I have. Every pro-gunner needs to say, you don't have the authority to make that decision for me. That's where it starts. Show me by which mechanism you have the authority to aggress upon me, because that's what you're doing.
and they will not be able to. They will typically resort to an emotional argument, or they will say, "Well, society would be better." Or they'll throw out some vague ideas that don't have any factual basis behind them, and eventually ending up with the ad hominem attack. Well, you must want kids to be killed.
Right.
You must not like other people that you want them to die
Yeah.
by violence, and that's just not true.
And and their arguments all circle back to government has the authority. And
Of course,
our government was put in place, supposedly, by the consent of the governed. And the Second Amendment is the mechanism by which we withdraw our consent. And for a legislature to introduce a gun control bill is acting in direct conflict of interest to his constituents, whether they know it or not, whether they believe it or not. That legislator is acting in conflict of interest.
by its very nature, it would be restricting the rights
Yep.
of the individual citizen, and I don't see how that can be translated as a win for anybody. When the government usurps your right, whatever it may be, you lose.
Yep.
There's
So
no-
these kids are complaining about clear backpacks.
Oh, I did hear about this. The clear
Yep.
backpacks. That's
So one of these solutions in Florida is government did what government does best, and the solution to the failure of government is more government. Okay? So they said, you have to have these clear backpacks now so we know what you're carrying around in the school. And one of the kids wrote and said, well, that's not fair. Why am I being punished for someone else's actions? And it's like, why are you trying to take away the rights of every American because of someone else's actions? It's pure hypocrisy or ignorance.
You wonder if these kids ever were exposed to the ideas of satire and irony, because it's
I don't
really
know. It's like a walking onion article. So
it really is.
it is. So getting back to where we that was a huge tangent. Sorry. So we got back to, again, what can we do as individuals? And again, with the suicide, it's getting involved in each other's rights, with recognizing firearm accidents and how they're happening, and negligent discharges and how they're happening. Address it, figure it out, and move on. The other thing, a little bit more on the pro-gun side, the people who are actually gun owners, is addressing what causes accidents. Okay. Now, the pro-gun community is actually pretty good at figuring this out and getting on people. Like, it's not exactly accident, but the lady at Home Depot that stopped shoplifters. You know, the pro-gun community rallied around this and said, "You moron! That's not what this is for." And she was kind of an idiot about the response and everyone's reaction to her. She thought she was being a hero, but the pro-gun community said that's not what this is for. This is to keep you safe. You were not in any danger. These people running away, you acted outside your authority here. And the pro-gun community coalesced around on that. And that is lessons learned. That goes back into the pro-gun community. It says, hey, don't do this. You know, we use this as an example in our classes, in our CPL classes. Don't be doing stuff like this, okay? But when we talk about accidents, there was the guy with the leather holster. He was in a car. I can't remember if it was debunked or not, but there was a lot of scrutiny around it. He apparently reholstered his firearm. Something, the leather was old.
Yeah,
It was
it's like the leather had worn and it got into the trigger guard.
it got into the trigger guard, and it actuated the trigger.
Yeah,
So
shot himself in the foot or the leg or something.
yeah, and shot his car up, his Hyundai. I don't know what it was. So at any rate, the pro-gun community looks around this and says, okay, leather, semi-rigid, not fully rigid. You must inspect. You must, take care of it. You must be aware of this sort of thing. And the whole process is improved around this. So this is individuals in the community looking at this event and saying, we're going to do better about this. And that is what an active and caring community can do. And the pro-gun community is exceptionally good at this. And when I say pro-gun community, I mean the professional community. These are the people that are in gun clubs. These are people that are in just shooting sports, in self-defense and personal protection, and those people that take this seriously. This is not the people on YouTube waving their new purchase in their mom's bedroom or in their basement or something
those
like that.
Two kids on YouTube who decided to shoot one of them in the chest. You see this with the Desert Eagle 50 cal, and she was shooting her boyfriend with thinking that we're really going off here, sorry, but the phone book was supposed to stop the bullet. She shot him in the chest. It was supposed to be a big publicity stunt, and she killed her.
She killed him?
Her boyfriend. So I think what it is, I think, as a community, even we police our own to a certain degree, but we're introspective. If there's a problem in it, we'll look in. So, okay, how can we address it on our individual behavior? Okay, and people go out there and they'll look at the problem, and there'll be articles written about it. It'll be discussed, and it'll be passed down, and people will start hearing more about it, and then suddenly you're going to start hearing talk at the gun shop, at the gun range. Yeah, you should be doing this because we've discovered that it's better to behave in this fashion, or it's better to carry this type of holster, or it's better to do this, and the community as a whole grows.
Correct.
And there's no demand for an outside force to come in and police it. It's a matter of, well, we're doing this, we're taking it upon ourselves.
Correct.
So,
And that's something we can all do. So
really down to the individual.
the other thing in the gun violence stats is all the other occurrences, okay? So if someone's breaking into someone's house and the defender shoots the invader after repeated warnings and everything else,
That gets lumped
and the
right in there.
police rule it is a completely justifiable homicide, this counts as a firearm-related injury or a death or a gun violence issue. Even though the law has said this person acted
Yeah.
appropriately,
Yeah.
and the right person is alive.
And they lump in police shootings into it. as
They
well.
lump in police
And
shootings.
when you have really examined that 30 to 33,000 number per year of firearm-related deaths, you start to see that there are, once you peel all the variables away, really about 5,000 to 6,000 deaths, homicides, crimes committed each year that result in deaths by firearms that
Yeah.
aren't justified, that aren't police shootings, that aren't accidents, that aren't suicides.
And this isn't a population of a country with a population of what, 275
The
million?
300 and like 300 over 300 million.
Are we over 300
We're
now?
over 300
Okay.
million.
Wow.
So that's statistically. Look, we're not saying at all that these deaths are insignificant. They're significant to the people that to their loved ones, and every death is a tragedy. However, when you look in the broader context of the general population, you can see it's pretty statistically insignificant. You are probably not going to encounter a firearm in a violent encounter in your lifetime. We live in probably the safest time in the United States of America.
Yeah.
Yet you would not know that if you listen to the news media of the day. It's always talking about the latest violent incident, the latest shooting, and the statistics don't bear it out.
Yep. It's over sensationalization. It's marketing. It's network ratings and public policy is now being driven because of network ratings.
Yeah, I think that the term was coined infotainment.
Infotainment. Yeah.
Not no longer are they in the business of reporting the news. They're in the business of massaging and putting it out there to advance agendas and get ratings. So,
Yep.
But all of this, it brings us back to what we talked about at the beginning. A lot of this can be countered with proper education, and Don and I have been doing this for about 10 years now in terms
I'd
of
say so,
education and instructing. And there are a lot of things that you can do. There are NRA, even though a lot of people cringe at the thought of going to an NRA event, there are a lot of NRA does a lot of good with education that can teach you about firearms. Go to your local sportsman club or gun shop. People there will be happy to instruct you on firearms.
Go to our classes.
We do a family
Family firearm safety. Yep.
And honestly, as Don will tell you, we don't even. There's no firearms in the class. We don't even talk too much about firearms. We deal more with whether it's right for you. And,
Yep. These are the laws surrounding owning a firearm. These are the rights that you have to own a firearm. And these are the responsibilities that you will take on should you choose to do so. That's what the whole class is about, is it right for you? So, again, what can you do? This is something we do. We actually had that class is free. We run that class periodically and we do not charge for it. Because the last thing we want is for you, the person on the fence owning a firearm or not, to make this choice without being educated on it and becoming one of those numbers that we have to talk about 3 podcasts later. Okay? We want you to be safe. Now, that may mean you getting a firearm so that you can protect yourself or your family, or you can enjoy the traditional, American heritage thing, target shooting, hunting, whatnot. It may be any one of those reasons, or even just collecting. There's a lot of people that just collect firearms because they're awesome. And
they're very expensive too, so you got a lot of money.
Yep. So that may be the choice for you. And if that's the choice for you, awesome. Welcome to the gun community. And if you decide after taking a course and getting your education that firearm ownership is not right for you,
That's fine.
Awesome. We thank
Absolutely.
you because you have acted responsibly, which is what we want. Okay? We don't want you to be a number. We don't want you to be a counter to someone else's rights. But more importantly, and most importantly, we want you to still be safe. Okay? So if you decide that this isn't right for you, you have made an honest and educated and responsible choice. And we count you among us because you did the right thing for you. Okay? So the anti-gun crowd wants to come in and take our guns away. You know what the pro-gun crowd doesn't want? We're not like forcing you to go out and buy one of these into your home. All right? All we want is for you to have the individual choice. That's what we're going for here.
Because at the end of the day, it is you that are in the position to make the best decisions for you.
Yep. So take a class, get educated on the topic, and by educated, I mean really go out and take a class from the pro-gun community. And do that in a way that is not marketing, or it's not rhetoric, or it's not, a meme war on Facebook or something like that. The pro-gun community has better memes, by the way. Just get educated on the topic if it means seeing both sides. And the truth is, you have already seen the anti-gun side anytime you turn on the TV. Go out and get educated on the pro-gun side. Check out what we have to say on it, whether it's in a class or an online like a YouTube or something like that. And check it out and get educated on the other half of the topic. So I like to use the example in the 80s, homosexuality was like an up-and-coming thing. Okay, I guess it's always been a thing, but this was like a big thing in the 80s. People were coming out of the closet, and society, American culture, had to learn to deal with it.
You're not trying to tell me anything, are you? down.
I'm not trying to tell you anything. No, this is not an indicator. This is a topic. So, but he's being empathetic, he's caring. See, that's what it's all about. So, the point is education was the driving force, okay? There was this big hysteria. These gay people were coming out and saying, I'm gay, you must accept me. And they were right, okay? They are gay. Yes, we should accept them for who they are, but we have the freedom of association, so we can or can't. And in the grand scheme of things, I don't really care what someone else does in their bedroom, and nor should anyone really else. It's almost a non-topic nowadays. Just
It's
whatever, dude.
Between them and their God. That's
Right.
all. That's it. Yeah.
So, but at the time, it was every mosquito bite is going to give you
Yeah,
AIDS.
yeah, that's
You
right.
can't use public restrooms, right? And all this other stuff. And it's like, so education was the counter to the hysteria or the fear. The education was, no, you're not going to get a mosquito bite. You're not going to get AIDS from a mosquito bite. No, you're not going to get AIDS from a public restroom. Sharing needles, not such a good idea. Unprotected intercourse, not such a good idea. And education came around here, okay? And with education, people knew what they can and can't do. And then all this stuff was able to be mitigated. And this disease that was associated with homosexuality was able to be controlled. Okay, and that's ultimately what needs to happen here, is all of this hysteria and this fear, which is what the anti-gunners are using as their mechanism to drive their agenda, needs to be countered, and that countering is with education.
Yeah.
All right, and that's something that they don't want. They don't want you getting educated on the topic. They don't want you taking a course. They want you to be afraid of guns, afraid of evil black assault rifles.
Oh, boy.
All right? Which leads us into, go ahead, sorry.
It just that doesn't fit the narrative.
It doesn't fit their
agenda, and their agenda typically in their narrative is emotionally driven.
Yep.
And facts in those cases, if they make appearances, will typically be twisted. Facts will be omitted, and they'll be cherry picked. Just again to advance their agenda. When you are looking for somebody to educate you or to get educated on any subject, you need to find someone impartial to tell you about it, or you need to seek out both sides and listen to them and be a free thinker, be an independent thinker, and be able to think for yourself and weigh the pros and cons of the arguments.
Yep. And get the facts. And if you happen to be in Michigan, look us up. It's www.keepandbearllc.com.
No comma.
No comma. Yep. And look us up, find out when our next course is, and let us know that, hey, I'm an anti-gunner, but I want to know what I'm dealing with. Fine. We'd love to have you. We would love to have you there. We will be neutral about it. We teach in a neutral, friendly, non-confrontational attitude.
We've got a pink gun you can use. No. No pink gun. No.
Yep.
No, we would be very non-confrontational.
Yep.
That's not the point of it at all. We're here to help and educate.
And sometimes crack jokes. But at least you've got the knowledge, okay? And if you are on the fence about it and you're genuinely neutral about it, then this course is what's right for you, because you are our target audience ultimately. And if you're pro-gun and you just want to come by and hang out, yeah, hey, come on by. So education is the key here. Education brings in the facts. Once the facts are known, you can make the correct decisions. Once the facts are known, you can't vilify the other side. There can always still be a little bit of prejudice, but you can't vilify them in unfounded ways because the facts are right there to counter it. And that is something that the anti-gun side has been very good at, is managing the fear. Mm-hmm. They have been very good at keeping up this level of energy and fear around this and enforcing it.
It's a very slick production.
Yep. And once that education happens, there's the media doesn't have the control that they did. And that's ultimately what we're looking for. And like Bears said, you can make the right choice for you.
So in the meantime, happy hunting, stay safe. We hope to hear from you. And we will be doing this again soon.
Yep.
So in the meantime, I'm Barrage.
And I'm Don, and we're keeping Bear LLC.
Take care.